This is the continents of the world. But this is the continent of the world as some historians see it. Is it possible that there was a lost continent just south of India and just east of Africa that connected the two continents? Well, there's some evidence that suggests that this could be true. First of all, we need to talk about who suggested this first. Based on some geological studies and animal evidence, they figured out that some animals and some fauna and flora found in Madagascar, Australia, and India had a lot in common. This was in the 1800s. Because of this, they realized that there must have been something connecting these three places, or Lemuria, based on the lemur. Now, maybe this is just a guess and it's incorrect, but it actually has other evidence. What is this other evidence? Well, what about India itself? In India, there is a continent that is spoken about that is just south of India, and it's a vast continent with an entire civilization. And guess what? It has the same end as Lemuria. It is said that it was buried underneath the Indian Ocean, never to be seen again. Its name is Kumari Kandam, and it is mentioned more than once in Indian texts. And like I said, it's written about being just south of India and taking up an advanced part of land and living with a civilization that was way more advanced than we were back then. In fact, they say that it was the first advanced civilization. Now, instead of going through every Indian text that mentions this, I want to go a little far back to the ancients in the West that talk about a connection between India and Africa being one continent, or at least stemming from the same continent. Because the Kumari Kingdom says that the people of Kumari Kingdom left the continent after it sunk and went under the water. Philostratus wrote a book called Life of Apollonius of Thyna, also known by its Latin title Vita Apolloni, is a text in 8 books written in ancient Greece by Philostratus, and the book extensively describes the alleged travels of Apollonius to Italy, Hispania, Nubia, Syria, Mesopotamia, and India. Now, let's read exactly what he was saying and claiming about this place. There was then, he said, a time when the Ethiopians and the Indian race dwelt in this country, and when Ethiopia was yet not, but Egypt stretched its border beyond Meroe and the cataracts, and on the other side included in itself the fountains of the Nile, and on the other was only bounded by the mouths of the river. Well, at that time of which I speak, the Ethiopians lived here, and were subject to King Ganges, and the land was sufficient for their sustenance, and the gods watched over them. But when they slew this king, neither did the rest of the Indians regard them as pure, nor did the land permit them to remain upon it, for it spoiled the seed which they sowed in it. before it came into ear, and it inflicted miscarriages on their women, and it gave a miserable feed to their flocks. And wherever they tried to found a city, it would give way and sink down under their feet. Nay more, the ghost of Genghis drove them forward on their path, and struck terror into their multitude, and it did not quit them until they atoned to earth by sacrificing the murderers who had shed the king's blood with their hands. So what we're seeing here is three cultures saying the same exact story. The Ethiopians are in India or somewhere close to India and subject to the Indians. Then, below their feet, the earth sinks until they atone for their sins, and then they are then safe in Ethiopia after they apologize for what they did by sacrificing the people who did the crime. So, were they correct? Was there really a continent in between Africa and India? Well, the answer is probably not. And I'll tell you why. Firstly, that story is almost certainly not real, the one written by Philostratus. Secondly, the story written in the Indian text is only vague about what's really going on. Even this one is vague, it doesn't even mention another continent. And then, lastly, the information that was done by the 1800s people did not consider so much other detail that we have today in the modern world. And so, this continent almost certainly did not exist. And if there was a giant continent like that that went under the water, we would have found it by now, especially given the fact that they said it was so advanced. Anyway, that did not happen. What really happened is that if you want the connection between Indian civilization and African civilization, realize that both existed, and you do not need a something as lame as a continent to be made up in order to show this similarity. Even the fact that animals were once connected. I mean, if you look at Brazil and West Africa, you can see that the geology and the animals and stuff match between Brazil and Africa. And this is because these places were connected once through the whole, you know, continental drift and all that other stuff. This is just the world we live in. And this is a fake continent. Perhaps.